My son didn't speak to me for 15 years, until I struck it rich. Suddenly, I got an invite for New Year's. But what I did that night shocked everyone. It's funny how a life can pivot on a single, ordinary moment. For me, that moment started with the smell of burnt coffee and the familiar hum of the fluorescent lights in my garage. It was a Friday night, sometime in late October, the kind of evening where the chill in the air promises that winter is just around the corner. I remember the exact feeling of wiping my hands on an old, oil-stained rag. It was a good feeling. The satisfaction of a hard day's work, of fixing something broken with your own two hands. My garage, Frank's Auto Repair, wasn't much to look at. Just a two-bay shop on the edge of town. But it was mine. Every bolt, every wrench, every greasy spot on the concrete floor was a testament to 16-hour days and a dream I'd built from the ground up. I was 42 years old, and my life was simple, predictable. I had my garage, my small house with a slightly crooked porch swing, and my family. My wife, Linda, and our son, Kevin. That night, I was just closing up. The last car of the day, a beat-up sedan with a tricky transmission, was finally purring like it was supposed to. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of motor oil and metal, a smell I'd come to associate with peace. I was thinking about the weekend. Maybe I'd take Kevin fishing. He was 14, at that age where he was more interested in video games and friends than his old man. But sometimes, if I caught him in the right mood, he'd still come along. I was picturing it. The quiet lake at dawn, the gentle bob of the float, the rare moments of easy conversation. I locked the bay doors, the heavy chain rattling in the silence, and headed to my small office in the back to count the day's earnings. It was enough. It was always just enough to pay the mortgage, the bills, and put food on the table. We weren't rich, not by a long shot, but we were comfortable. I thought we were happy. My phone buzzed on the cluttered desk, rattling against a stray socket wrench. It was Linda. "Hey, honey." Her voice came through, a little too loud, a little too bright. There was music in the background, the muffled thumping of a bass line and a cacophony of voices. "Listen, the party at work is running way later than I thought. Could you come pick me up?" Linda worked as an administrative assistant at a big downtown marketing firm, Global Innovations. She loved the glamour of it, the sleek glass building, the important-sounding job titles. I was happy for her, even if I didn't quite get it. To me, it was just an office. "Sure, hun," I said, glancing at the clock. It was already past 9. "Where are you? The office?" There was a slight pause. "Yep, still at the office. We're on the 7th floor. Just text me when you're downstairs. It might take me a few minutes to say my goodbyes. You know how it is." Something in her voice felt off, a little strained, but I brushed it aside. She was probably just tired and wanted to come home. "No problem," I said. "I'm closing up now. Should be there in about 30 minutes. "You're the best, Frankie," she cooed, using a nickname she hadn't used in years. Then she hung up. I sat there for a second, the silence of the garage rushing back in. The contrast between my quiet, greasy world and her loud, fancy party felt starker than usual. I finished my paperwork, locked the office, and climbed into my own trusty pickup truck. The engine rumbled to life, a familiar, comforting sound. The drive into the city was routine, the orange glow of the streetlights painting stripes across my windshield, the radio playing some forgotten rock song from my youth. I thought about Linda. I remembered when we first met. I was a young mechanic with nothing but calloused hands and a head full of dreams. And she was this vibrant, beautiful girl who saw something in me. We'd built this life together, brick by brick. Or so I believed. Pulling up to the towering glass skyscraper that housed her company, I felt a familiar pang of being out of place. My dusty truck looked like a relic next to the sleek, expensive cars lining the street. I sent her a text. "I'm here." Her reply was almost instant. "Great. Be down in 5. Just saying bye." I leaned back in my seat, watching the city lights blur through the glass. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel, the classic rock station starting to grate on my nerves. I tried to imagine the party. Linda laughing, holding a glass of sparkling water, charming her coworkers with her easy smile. She was good at that. She could light up a room. That was one of the things I loved about her. After 20 minutes, I sent another text. "Everything okay?" This time, the reply took longer. "So sorry. Got caught up talking to my boss. For real this time, be right down." Another 15 minutes crawled by. The initial patience I had was starting to curdle into a knot of irritation in my stomach. It was cold, and I was tired. I just wanted to go home. I turned off the engine and just sat there, in the silence, watching the entrance of the building. People trickled out in small groups, laughing, hailing cabs. None of them were Linda. I felt a strange sense of dread begin to creep up my spine. It wasn't just irritation anymore. It was a cold, prickling feeling, like an alarm bell ringing softly in the back of my mind. Why the delay? Why the overly cheerful, slightly frantic tone in her texts? I thought about Kevin, home alone, probably glued to his computer screen. I should be home. We should be home. Finally, after nearly an hour of waiting in the cold, I'd had enough. Something was wrong. I wasn't angry anymore. I was worried. I got out of my truck, the cool night air hitting my face, and walked toward the imposing glass doors of the building. I was going to find my wife. I just had no idea that in doing so, I was about to find the ruin of the life I knew. The security guard at the front desk, a weary-looking man with a kind face, looked up from his newspaper. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked. "I'm here to pick up my wife," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "Linda Miller, from Global Innovations. Their party is on the 7th floor." The guard frowned slightly. "The Global Innovations party? Sir, they started packing that up an hour ago. I think pretty much everyone is gone." The guard's words hung in the air of the cavernous marble lobby. "Gone?" I repeated, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "But my wife just texted me. She said she was still there." He gave me a sympathetic shrug, the kind of gesture from someone who has seen too many of life's little dramas play out in front of his desk. "I can't speak for your wife, sir, but the catering crew packed up and left a good while ago. Most of the employees were gone even before that. The 7th floor is probably dark by now." A cold dread, sharp and icy, was spreading through my chest. The simple irritation I'd felt in the truck was a distant memory, replaced by a visceral, sickening feeling of wrongness. Every excuse I could conjure in my head sounded flimsy and pathetic. Maybe she went to the restroom. Maybe she lost track of time. But an hour? And why lie about the party still going on? Can I just go up and check?" I asked, my voice tight. "I need to be sure." The guard hesitated, looking me over. I was just a guy in a work jacket and jeans, smelling faintly of oil, clearly out of place in this pristine environment. But he must have seen the desperation in my eyes. All right, he sighed, pressing a button to unlock the turnstile. But if the lights are off, you come right back down. I don't want anyone wandering around up there. I thanked him and hurried to the elevator, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The ride up to the 7th floor was the longest ride of my life. The polished steel doors reflected a distorted, worried version of myself. Each number that lit up on the panel felt like a tick on a stopwatch, counting down to something I didn't want to see. When the doors slid open, I was met with near darkness and an unnerving silence. The guard was right. The party was over. The large, open-plan office space was empty, with only the faint glow of the city lights outside filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. A few stray balloons drooped sadly in a corner, and the air smelled of stale food and cleaning supplies. "Linda?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the vast, empty space. The only reply was the echo of my own words. I walked through the maze of deserted cubicles, my work boots feeling loud and clumsy on the polished concrete floor. I saw her desk. It was neat, with a framed photo of me and Kevin, sitting right at the front. Seeing it felt like a punch to the gut. It was a picture from a vacation we'd taken 2 summers ago. We were all smiling. We looked happy. I felt a surge of panic. Where was she? Did something happen to her? My mind, in a desperate attempt to avoid the obvious conclusion, raced through a dozen terrible scenarios. But then I saw it, a discarded name tag on the floor near the elevators. It said, "Mark Jennings, Vice President." The name meant nothing to me, but as I stood there, a different memory surfaced. A few weeks ago, Linda had been on the phone, laughing in that same bright, slightly forced way she had tonight. I'd asked who it was. "Oh, just Mark from work," she'd said dismissively. "He's so full of himself. But you have to play the game, you know?" At the time, I hadn't thought twice about it. Now, it felt significant. As I stood there, lost in the echoing silence of the office, one of the cleaning crew, an older woman with a kind, tired face, pushed her cart around the corner. She jumped when she saw me. "Oh, you startled me," she said, her hand on her chest. "Sorry," I mumbled. "I'm looking for my wife, Linda Miller. Did you see her?" The woman, her name tag read Maria, paused, leaning on her cart. "Linda? Oh yeah, the pretty blonde from reception. I saw her, but she left a long, long time ago." My stomach tightened. "How long ago?" Must have been close to 2 hours now," she said, thinking. "Right after the main party rush. She didn't leave alone, though." I held my breath. Who did she leave with? Maria frowned, trying to remember. One of the big shots. The guy with the fancy suit and the expensive watch. Tall fella. I think his name is Mark. Yeah, Mark. They left together. They were laughing about going to that new place downtown. What's it called? The Onyx Lounge. The Onyx Lounge. The name hit me like a physical blow. It was one of those new, ridiculously expensive places that had just opened up, the kind of place you only read about in magazines. The kind of place I would never, ever be able to afford. The kind of place Linda and I would joke about. We'd have to sell the truck just to get a glass of water in there, I'd said once, and she had laughed. The pieces were all clicking into place, forming a picture so ugly and painful I couldn't bear to look at it. Yet I couldn't look away. The lie about the party, the delayed texts, the fake cheerfulness. It wasn't a last-minute change of plans. It was a premeditated deception. She wasn't with her co-workers. She was with him, with Mark. I thanked Maria, my voice a hoarse whisper, and walked back to the elevator in a daze. The ride down felt like a descent into a new, terrible reality. The friendly security guard saw the look on my face and didn't say a word, just nodded as I pushed through the turnstile and out into the cold night. My truck, my safe, familiar truck, now felt like a cage. I sat behind the wheel, my hands gripping it so tightly my knuckles were white. My mind was a whirlwind of denial and rage. This couldn't be happening. Not Linda. Not my Linda. There had to be an explanation. A reason. Maybe it was a work thing, a meeting. But my gut, that deep, primal instinct that had kept me safe in the garage and warned me of unseen dangers, was screaming at me. It was screaming that I was a fool. I started the truck, the engine's roar sounding angry, accusatory. Without making a conscious decision, I pulled out into the street and turned in the direction of downtown. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there. I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that I had to see. I had to know for sure. The drive was a blur. The city lights smeared into streaks of color. The other cars were just obstacles in my path. The radio was off now, and the only sound was the thrum of the engine and the frantic, painful beating of my own heart. I found the Onyx Lounge easily. It was exactly as I'd imagined. Sleek, modern, with a velvet rope out front and a doorman who looked like he could bench press my truck. And parked right near the entrance, in a spot that was probably reserved, was a gleaming black sports car that cost more than my house. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was his car. I was about to either confirm my worst fears or make the biggest fool of myself in my entire life. Either way, there was no turning back. Parking my dusty pickup a block away felt like a strategic retreat, a way to observe without being seen. I felt like a spy in my own life, an intruder on the verge of discovering a truth I was certain I didn't want to know. The Onyx Lounge glowed. It wasn't a friendly, welcoming light, but a cold, exclusive blue that seemed to hum with an energy I didn't understand. I watched people go in and out. Women in sparkling dresses, men in tailored suits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. They all moved with an easy confidence, a sense of belonging that made me feel even more like an outsider. I sat in my truck for what felt like an eternity, the engine off, the cold seeping through the metal. I was wrestling with myself. One part of me, the logical, scared part, was screaming to just go home, to climb into bed, pretend this night never happened, and confront Linda in the morning in the safety of our own kitchen. Maybe I had it all wrong. Maybe this was all some giant, terrible misunderstanding. But the other part of me, the part that was raw with betrayal and a desperate need for the truth, knew I couldn't. I couldn't live with a what if. I couldn't unknow what the cleaning lady had told me. I couldn't unfeel the cold knot of dread in my stomach. So I got out of the truck. Walking that block to the lounge was the hardest walk of my life. Each step was heavy, deliberate. I felt the grease under my fingernails, the worn fabric of my jeans, the scuff on the toe of my work boot. I had never felt more like a simple mechanic than I did in that moment, walking toward a place I had no business being. The doorman gave me a once-over, his expression a mixture of disdain and mild curiosity. I probably looked like I was there to fix the plumbing. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone flat, already dismissing me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I'm meeting my wife," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out strained. I didn't wait for his response. I just pushed past the velvet rope and stepped inside. The inside of the lounge was dark and loud. Low, pulsing music vibrated through the floor, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and something else. Success, maybe. It was crowded, a sea of beautiful, laughing people, all bathed in that same cold, blue light. For a moment, I was overwhelmed, disoriented. I stood near the entrance, scanning the room, my eyes struggling to adjust to the dimness. And then I saw them. They were tucked away in a curved leather booth in a corner, a spot that was clearly designed for intimacy and privacy. The blue light from a nearby wall panel cast them in a dramatic, almost cinematic glow. It was Linda and a man I assumed was Mark. He was exactly as I'd pictured. Tall, with perfect hair, wearing a suit that looked like it was made for him. He was leaning in close to her, one hand resting possessively on the back of the booth behind her head. But it was Linda who held my gaze. It was Linda who broke my heart in that single, frozen moment. She was laughing, a genuine, uninhibited laugh that I hadn't heard from her in years. Not at home, anyway. At home, her laughs were tired, distracted. This was different. This was the laugh of the girl I had fallen in love with, and she was giving it to him. Her head was tilted back, her blonde hair catching the light. She had one hand on his arm, her fingers tracing a small pattern on the sleeve of his expensive suit. They weren't just talking. They were orbiting each other, their body language screaming a comfortable intimacy that takes months, if not years, to build. They were in their own little world, oblivious to the crowded room around them, and completely oblivious to the man whose world was shattering just a few feet away. I felt a strange calm wash over me. The frantic panic was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp certainty. There was no misunderstanding. This was the truth. It was ugly, and it was real. I started walking toward them. The short distance across the room felt like a mile. The sounds of the lounge faded into a dull roar in my ears. All I could see was the two of them in that booth. As I got closer, I could hear their conversation. He was telling some story about a trip to Europe, and she was hanging on his every word, her eyes wide with admiration. "Oh, Mark, you're incredible," she sighed. And the words were like a physical stab to my chest. I reached the table and just stood there, waiting. It took them a few seconds to notice me. It was Mark who saw me first. His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance, the look you give a waiter who has interrupted you. Then he saw my face, and the annoyance shifted to confusion. Then Linda followed his gaze. Her eyes met mine. The transformation on her face was something I will never forget. First came the shock, a deer in the headlights paralysis. Her smile vanished, frozen on her lips. Her hand flew back from his arm as if it were on fire. Then the shock melted into pure, unadulterated guilt. Her face flushed, her eyes darted around, looking for an escape. And finally, as if to protect herself, the guilt hardened into anger. Her expression became defiant, cold. "Frank," she said, her voice a sharp, brittle thing. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I was surprised at how steady it was. "You asked me to pick you up, at your office, an hour and a half ago." Mark, to his credit, recovered quickly. He leaned back, sizing me up with an arrogant, condescending air. "Look, pal," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Linda and I were just having a post-work celebration." "Is that what you call this?" I asked, my gaze still locked on Linda. "A post-work celebration? Is that why you lied to me? Why you had me sitting in my truck for over an hour like an idiot?" Linda's face hardened. "Keep your voice down, Frank. You're making a scene." I'm making a scene, I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. The whole lounge seemed to be holding its breath, the people at the nearby tables shamelessly watching the drama unfold. I think the scene was already made before I got here. I looked from her guilty, angry face to his smug one. The expensive suit, the perfect hair, the life he offered her. I finally understood. It wasn't just about another man. It was about another life, a life I could never give her. The silence stretched on, thick with betrayal. The drive home wasn't going to be silent. There wouldn't be a drive home. Not together. In that moment, standing under the cold blue lights of that awful place, I knew my marriage was over. The drive away from the Onyx Lounge was a blur of red tail lights and rain-slicked streets. I didn't take Linda with me. I left her there, in the booth, with her new life. I just turned and walked away. I couldn't stand to look at her for another second. The fury that had carried me through the confrontation evaporated the moment I was back in my truck, leaving a hollow, cavernous emptiness in its place. I just drove, aimlessly. I ended up in a deserted parking lot overlooking the city, the skyline a collection of indifferent, glittering lights. The life I had known, the foundation I had built everything on, had been a lie. How long had this been going on? Months? Years? Every memory I had with her was now tainted, suspect. Every late night at the office, every business trip, every distracted smile. It was a cascade of reevaluation, each memory twisting into something ugly. I finally went home in the early hours of the morning, when the sky was beginning to lighten from black to a bruised purple. Her car was in the driveway. She was home. I walked into our small house, and it felt like walking into a stranger's home. The air was thick with unspoken words. She was sitting at the kitchen table, still in her party dress, looking small and defiant. "We need to talk," she said, her voice void of the warmth it once held. The conversation that followed was the most painful one of my life. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She explained. She said she felt stifled, that she had outgrown our simple life. She talked about ambition, about wanting more, about how Mark understood her in a way I never could. He saw her potential, she said. I was just a mechanic, content in my greasy little world, while she was meant for boardrooms and fancy lounges. Each word was a carefully chosen dart, aimed to hurt, to justify her betrayal. "It's been going on for 6 months," she admitted coolly, as if discussing the weather. "I was going to tell you. I was just waiting for the right time." "The right time?" I scoffed, the sound raw and broken. "When exactly was that going to be, Linda? After you'd secured your new life with him completely?" And that's when she delivered the final, most devastating blow. This was the moment that truly defined the next 15 years of my life. It was a masterclass in cruelty. She looked at me, her eyes cold and calculating, and said, "If you make this ugly, Frank, I swear I will make you regret it. I will tell Kevin everything. I'll tell him how you were never here, always at that garage. How you cared more about cars than your own family. I'll tell him you were neglectful and emotionally absent. He's a sensitive boy. He loves his mother. Who do you think he's going to believe?" I stared at her, speechless. It was a threat of such profound malice that I couldn't comprehend it at first. She was threatening to poison my own son against me, to use our child as a weapon to ensure her smooth, guilt-free exit. The fight went out of me. The anger, the righteousness, it all just drained away, replaced by a chilling fear. The next morning, she put her plan into action. She sat Kevin down before I even had a chance to speak to him alone. I could hear their muffled voices from the living room. When Kevin finally emerged, his face was a mask of confusion and anger. He wouldn't look at me. "Kevin, can we talk?" I pleaded, my voice cracking. He stood in the hallway, his arms crossed, his young face set in a scowl that looked so much like mine. It broke my heart. "Mom told me," he said, his voice trembling with a 14-year-old's righteous fury. "She told me how you made her unhappy, how you were never around. You were always choosing that stupid garage over us." It was like hearing Linda's words parroted back at me from my own son's mouth. She had done it. She had painted me as the villain, and he had believed her. Every attempt I made to explain was met with a wall of angry silence or an accusation. "You're just trying to make her look bad," he spat at me. "You're the one who ruined everything." In the weeks that followed, the divorce was swift and brutal. Linda and her lawyer, undoubtedly paid for by Mark, ran circles around me. She got the house. She got primary custody of Kevin. My world had been reduced to my garage and a small, depressing apartment above a laundromat. The supervised visits she had insisted on were a special kind of torture. Kevin would show up, sullen and silent, counting the minutes until he could leave. He would answer my questions with one-word answers and spend the entire time on his phone. After a few months, he just stopped coming. Linda called me, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "He just doesn't want to see you, Frank. I can't force him. Maybe you should give him some space." Soon after, they moved. Linda, Kevin, and Mark. They moved to a wealthier suburb on the other side of the state. The number I had for her was disconnected. My letters were returned, unopened. The birthday and Christmas presents I sent were, I assume, thrown away. Just like that, my son was gone. The silence was absolute. For 15 years, I heard nothing. Not a call, not a card, not a single word. I was a ghost in my own son's life. Linda had won. She had gotten her new life, and she had taken my son with her, leaving me with nothing but the echoing silence and the haunting memory of my boy's accusing eyes. The pain of it all settled deep into my bones, a constant, dull ache that never truly went away. I threw myself into the only thing I had left, my work. The garage became my sanctuary and my prison. The smell of oil and metal was the only thing that felt real anymore. I worked from sunup to sundown, punishing myself, trying to outrun the memories. I told myself I was building a business, but really, I was just building a fortress around my broken heart. The first few years of the silence were the hardest. Every holiday was a fresh wound. Christmas morning, I'd wake up in my small apartment, the silence deafening, and imagine Kevin opening presents in a big, beautiful house with his mother and Mark. On his birthday, I'd buy a cake, a small, sad-looking thing from the grocery store, and eat a single slice alone, wishing him well to an empty room. I tried everything. I hired a private investigator once, just to get an address. I sent a letter. It came back a month later, stamped "Return to Sender." I tried calling directory assistants in their new town, but the number was unlisted. I had been effectively erased. It was a masterful, complete removal from their lives. The ache in my chest never went away, but over time, it changed. It became less of a sharp, stabbing pain and more of a constant, low-grade fever of sorrow. I learned to live with it. I had to. My life became a simple, monotonous loop. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. My garage was the only place I felt any semblance of control. And so I poured every ounce of my energy, my grief, and my anger into it. I started staying open later. I took on jobs other mechanics would turn down, the complicated, finicky ones that required patience and precision. My reputation grew. People started coming from neighboring towns because they heard Frank Miller was the most honest, reliable mechanic around. He could fix anything, except his own life. After 5 years, I had saved enough to expand. I bought the empty lot next to my garage and added 4 more bays. I hired my first employee, a young kid named Dave, who was eager to learn. Then I hired another. Within 10 years, Frank's Auto Repair wasn't just a 2-bay shop anymore. It was Frank's Auto Group, with 3 locations across the county. I was still the same guy. Still wore the same greasy overalls. But the numbers in my bank account started to look different. I moved out of the apartment above the laundromat and bought a decent house on a quiet street. It was too big for one person, the rooms echoing with a loneliness that money couldn't fill. I never remarried. I went on a few dates, but my heart wasn't in it. It was like a part of me had been walled off, permanently closed for business. The betrayal had left a scar so deep, I was terrified of letting anyone get close enough to see it. And then, about 14 years into the silence, something unexpected happened. It wasn't about love or family. It was about work. I'd always been a tinkerer, constantly fiddling with ways to make things more efficient. For years, I had been developing a new type of diagnostic software in my spare time, a system that could predict engine failure with 99% accuracy based on subtle vibrational data. It was just a hobby at first, a way to occupy my mind. But Dave, my first employee who was now my general manager, convinced me to patent it. He said it was revolutionary. I thought he was just being nice. He was wrong. It wasn't revolutionary. It was a gold mine. We took it to a trade show, and a representative from one of the biggest automotive manufacturers in the world saw it. They didn't just want to license it, they wanted to buy it. The whole thing. The patent, the code, everything. The negotiations took months. My lawyer, a proper one this time, not the overwhelmed public defender from my divorce, handled everything. I just sat in meetings, a simple mechanic in a borrowed suit, listening to them talk about numbers that seemed like they belonged in another universe. The final offer was $50 million. The number was so large it felt fake. I signed the papers in a daze. The next day, the money was in my account. A local news station picked up the story. From greasy rags to riches, local mechanic sells invention for a fortune. It was a feel-good piece, a story of the American dream. They filmed me in my original garage, my hands still dirty, talking about hard work and perseverance. I didn't mention my broken family. I didn't mention the 15 years of crushing loneliness. I just played the part they wanted. The humble, hard-working guy who got lucky. The story went viral online. For a few days, my face was everywhere. And then, about 3 weeks after the news broke, my phone rang. It was an evening in early December. I was sitting in my quiet, empty house, watching the snow fall outside. The number was unlisted from an area code I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something made me press the green button. "Hello?" I said. There was a pause on the other end, just the sound of someone breathing. Then a voice spoke, a voice that was deeper and belonged to a man, but was still hauntingly familiar. "Dad?" My heart stopped. I would have known that voice anywhere, even after all this time. It was Kevin. "Kevin?" I whispered, my hand trembling. "Yeah, it's me," he said, his voice awkward, strained. I saw you on the news. The invention thing. That's really great. Congratulations." The conversation was stilted, painful. 15 years of silence couldn't be bridged with a few clumsy sentences. We talked about the weather. He asked about the business. It was all surface-level, meaningless chatter. I wanted to scream at him, to ask him why. Why now? Why after all this time? But I didn't. I just listened, my heart a chaotic mix of elation and suspicion. And then he got to the real reason for his call. "So, listen," he said, trying to sound casual. "It's kinda last minute, I know, but Mom and Mom and Mark, were having a New Year's Eve party at their house, and we were wondering. We'd really love for you to come." An invitation. After 15 years of silence, an invitation. It wasn't a letter of apology. It wasn't a tearful plea for forgiveness. It was a party invitation. And I knew, with a sinking, bitter certainty, that it had absolutely nothing to do with me, and everything to do with the $50 million sitting in my bank account. The invitation hung in the air between us, a monument to opportunism. For a few days after the call, I was a wreck. A war was raging inside me. Part of me, the wounded father who had yearned for any contact for 15 years, was desperate to say yes. It was a chance to see my son, a chance, however slim, to rebuild some kind of bridge over the chasm of silence. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the money was just the catalyst, the event that finally gave him the courage to reach out. Maybe he had grown up, realized the truth, and felt guilty. Hope is a stubborn, tenacious thing, and it was whispering these possibilities in my ear. But the other part of me, the part that had been forged in betrayal and hardened by 15 years of lonely nights, was cynical. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a hook. They didn't want a father. They wanted an investor. They wanted a bailout. The timing was too perfect, too sickeningly convenient. Linda's fingerprints were all over this. I could almost hear her coaching Kevin, telling him what to say. I spent a week wrestling with the decision. I walked the floors of my big, empty house, talking to myself, weighing the pros and cons. Going felt like walking into a trap. It felt like validating their terrible behavior, rewarding them for coming back only when I had something they wanted. But not going. Not going felt like closing the door forever. It felt like giving up that last, flickering ember of hope that I could have a relationship with my son. In the end, the cynic won, but with a twist. I decided to go. But I wouldn't be going as the heartbroken father, desperate for scraps of affection. I wouldn't be the simple mechanic, intimidated by their wealth and glamour. I was a different man now. 15 years of pain and the sudden acquisition of immense wealth had changed me. I would go, but I would go on my own terms. I had a plan. It wasn't a plan for revenge, not exactly. It was a plan for truth. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "I need you to hire a private investigator, the best you can find. I want to know everything about a man named Mark Jennings and his business dealings. I also want to know about my ex-wife, Linda Miller, and my son, Kevin Miller." It felt dirty, spying on my own family, but it was necessary. I needed to walk into that party armed with facts, not just suspicions. The second thing I did was go shopping. I'd spent my whole life in work boots and flannel shirts. The new money hadn't changed that. But for this occasion, I needed to look the part. I went to the most expensive men's store in the city and let the tailor work his magic. I bought a custom-made suit in a deep charcoal gray, a crisp white shirt, a silk tie, and shoes that cost more than my first car. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked powerful. I looked like someone who couldn't be easily manipulated. The investigators' report came back 2 days before New Year's Eve. It was even worse and better than I could have imagined. Mark's company, a high-end real estate development firm, was a house of cards. He had made a series of bad investments and was leveraged to the hilt. He was on the verge of bankruptcy, desperately trying to secure a new line of credit with no success. The mansion they lived in was mortgaged to the breaking point. The fancy cars were leased. It was all a facade, a carefully constructed illusion of wealth that was about to crumble. The report also had details about Kevin. He was 29 years old, had drifted through community college without a degree, and was working a low-level marketing job at Mark's failing company. He was living at home, trapped in their gilded cage. And Linda was listed as a partner in the company, though she had no real role. She was just playing the part of the wealthy corporate wife. They weren't inviting me to a party. They were inviting me to a rescue mission. Their rescue mission. On New Year's Eve, I got dressed in my new suit. It felt like armor. I drove my new car, a sleek but understated luxury sedan, not the flashy sports car they probably expected. The drive to their address took over an hour, into a part of the state known for its sprawling estates and gated communities. I pulled up to a massive iron gate and gave my name to the disembodied voice on the intercom. The gates swung open slowly, theatrically, revealing a long, winding driveway that led to a house that looked more like a hotel. It was all glass and stone, lit up like a beacon, music spilling out from its open doors. I parked the car and took a deep breath. Showtime. Linda greeted me at the door. She was older, of course, but just as beautiful. Dressed in a shimmering silver gown, her smile was blindingly bright and completely fake. "Frank," she exclaimed, pulling me into an awkward, air-kiss embrace. "You look incredible. A man of means." Her eyes scanned my suit, my car, calculating my worth. It was disgusting. Then Kevin appeared behind her. He looked so much like me it was a physical jolt. He was taller, broader, but he had my eyes. He looked nervous, his smile forced. "Dad," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so glad you came." Mark strode over, his hand outstretched, a predatory grin on his face. "Frank, good to see you, my friend. It's been too long." He clapped me on the shoulder, the picture of magnanimity. The whole scene was a perfectly rehearsed performance. The prodigal father, welcomed back into the fold now that he was worth something. They led me through the party, a swirling mass of people with a similar predatory glint in their eyes. Linda and Kevin flanked me, introducing me to everyone. "This is Kevin's father, Frank Miller," Linda would say, her voice filled with a pride that had been absent for 15 years. "You may have read about him in the news." I was the prize pony, being trotted out for all to see. I could feel their hands on my back, guiding me, steering me, their touch feeling less like affection and more like ownership. They never left my side. They brought me drinks, sparkling cider and a champagne flute, and refilled it before it was empty. They laughed at jokes I didn't make. The contrast was dizzying. For 15 years, I didn't exist. Now, I was the most important person in the world. As the night wore on, leading up to the midnight countdown, the desperation became more palpable. Mark cornered me by the fireplace, talking about a can't-miss investment opportunity. Kevin talked about his ideas for a new business, ideas that would require significant seed money. It was relentless. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. I looked around the opulent room, at all the smiling, false faces. I looked at Linda, her eyes shining with greed. I looked at Mark, his face a mask of anxious hope. And I looked at my son, my poor, lost son, looking at me with pleading eyes, a puppet in his mother's scheme. 7, 6, 5. I felt a strange sense of pity for him, but it was overshadowed by a cold, hard resolve. 4, 3, 2, 1. The room erupted. Happy New Year! People hugged and kissed. Linda threw her arms around me. A new year, a new beginning for our family, she declared loudly for everyone to hear. It was time. As the initial chaos of Happy New Year died down, Mark, holding a glass high, clinked it with a knife to get everyone's attention. The murmuring crowd quieted, all eyes turning to him. He stood by the grand fireplace, an arm draped possessively around Linda's shoulder, a smug smile plastered on his face. "Friends, family," he began, his voice booming with false confidence. "What an incredible year it has been, and what an even better one we have to look forward to. It's a time for new beginnings, for looking to the future. And tonight, it's a time for family, for healing old wounds and coming together." He looked directly at me, raising his glass. "To family." The crowd dutifully echoed, "To family," and took a sip of their drinks. Linda and Kevin were beaming at me, their faces alight with anticipation. They thought this was it. This was the moment their ship was coming in. They expected me to make a reciprocal toast, to announce a grand gesture, a multi-million-dollar investment that would save their crumbling empire. I let the silence settle for a moment, letting their hope and greed fill the room until it was almost palpable. Then, I gently set my untouched glass down on a nearby table. "I'd like to say something as well," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and steady, and it cut through the lingering chatter like a knife. The room went dead silent. Every single person turned to face me. I was the main event, and the show was about to begin. I let my gaze travel slowly across the room, meeting the eyes of the strangers, before landing on the three people who mattered: Linda, Mark, Kevin. "Mark is right," I began, my tone conversational. "The new year is a time for reflection, and I've been doing a lot of that lately. I've been thinking about the past 15 years. 15 years is a long time. It's 180 months. It's 5,475 days of silence." I saw a flicker of unease in Linda's eyes. This wasn't going according to her script. "It's a long time to wonder what you did wrong as a father," I continued, my voice gaining a hard edge of emotion. I looked directly at my son. "Kevin, for every single one of those days, I wondered what happened to my boy. I sent letters. I sent birthday cards and Christmas presents. They all came back unopened. I called until the phone number was disconnected. I thought I had failed you in some unforgivable way. I spent 15 years believing I was a terrible father who had driven his own son away." Kevin's face paled. He looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Good. Let him feel a fraction of the shame I felt for all those years. Then my gaze shifted to Linda. Her smile was gone, replaced by a tight, defensive mask. "But I wasn't the one who drove him away, was I, Linda? You were. You were the one who broke our family for a man with a bigger wallet. And when I found out, you didn't just leave. You poisoned our son's mind against me. You fed him lies, turned him into a weapon to secure your own comfortable escape. You didn't just break my heart. You stole my son." A collective gasp went through the room. The party guests were no longer just watching a drama. They were part of it, their polite smiles frozen on their faces. Mark stepped forward. "Now, see here, Frank," he started, his voice losing its smooth edge. This is hardly the time or place. This is the perfect time and place, I interrupted, holding up a hand to silence him. I reached into the inner pocket of my new suit and pulled out a simple folded document. Linda's and Kevin's eyes lit up again, a flash of desperate hope. They thought it was a check. "You've all been very welcoming tonight," I said, looking around the room, "so I wanted to bring a gift. A New Year's gift." I walked past my son. I walked past my ex-wife and her failing partner. I scanned the crowd until I saw a familiar face, a woman standing awkwardly near the back. It was Sarah, Linda's old co-worker, the one who had told me where Linda had really gone all those years ago. We'd kept in touch sporadically over the years, just a Christmas card now and then. She was a good person who'd had a tough life. I knew she was a single mother, working 2 jobs to put her daughters through college. I walked right up to her. The crowd parted for me like I was Moses. "Sarah," I said, my voice softening. "That night, 15 years ago, you were the only person who told me the truth. You were the only one with any decency." I handed her the document. "This is a trust fund. It's for your daughter's education. It will pay for their entire college tuition, books, and living expenses. It's $250,000. You don't have to worry about that anymore." Sarah stared at the paper, her hands trembling, tears welling in her eyes. "Frank, I can't." "You can," I said firmly, "and you will." Then I turned back to face the stunned trio at the front of the room. Their faces were a grotesque mixture of shock, fury, and disbelief. "As for my other gift," I said, my voice turning to ice, "it's the gift of truth. The truth I learned from the private investigator I hired when you called me." The color drained from Mark's face. "You see, I know your business is bankrupt, Mark. I know this house is on the verge of foreclosure and those fancy cars are leased. This party, this sudden family reunion, it was all a pathetic last-ditch effort to get a bailout from the gullible old mechanic." I looked at Kevin one last time. There was no pity left in me, only a profound sadness. "And you, son, you weren't calling to reconnect with your father. You were making a business transaction on your mother's behalf. She sold you out all those years ago, and she was trying to sell you out again tonight." I looked at the 3 of them, their perfect, glamorous world collapsing around them in real time. The whispers in the room were growing louder. "So, here is my gift to you," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "You didn't want a father. You didn't want an ex-husband. You wanted an ATM. And for you, this bank is permanently closed. Happy New Year." I turned my back on them, on all of it. I walked through the stunned, silent crowd, out the grand doors, and into the cold, clean night air. I didn't look back. The sound of the door closing behind me was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Driving away from that mansion, leaving that life of lies behind me, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in 15 years. The weight of the past, the anger, the sorrow, it was finally gone. I was sad for the boy I had lost, the son I would never truly know. But I was free. I had faced my ghosts and had not flinched. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was driving toward a new dawn, a real one, that was entirely my own.